Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So I try to find the answers to questions that are not readily found elsewhere, and today's video is a good example of that. And a few days ago, one of my subscribers, Hassan, contacted me and said that his self-hosted version of Immich, which is a picture and video backup program that you can use to replicate images and videos from your phone up to a self-hosted server, kind of something in lieu of Google Photos, if you will, started to have problems in uploading larger files. And specifically, he had some videos that were 4 gigs in size, tried to upload them, and he was getting an error. And after digging into this a little bit, I discovered that NginX Proxy Manager, which typically sits between the internet on your home lab and your self-hosted instances, for example, Nextcloud, Immich is the example we're going to look at in this video, and perhaps OnlyOffice, and it does so by providing a reverse proxy to make these services reachable behind your single WAN address and reachable through your various subdomain names. And I discovered, or he discovered I should say, that NPM can limit upload sizes for hosted services. So we're going to look at Immich, and we're going to look at how to bust these upload limits. And so NginX Proxy Manager allows you to expose multiple self-hosted services on the public internet from your home lab, as I mentioned at the onset. And self-hosted application instances are websites which have at their core some web server which may limit uploads. For example, the Nextcloud or OnlyOffice or Immich may actually have limitations in their uploads, preventing uploads from above a certain size from being successful. And so NPM is also a web server in of itself, and although it acts as a proxy, it limits uploads, and we found that by default it limits those uploads to 2 gigabytes. So in this presentation, I'm going to show how to self-host Immich, and I'm also going to show how to modify NginX Proxy Manager to allow for unlimited uploads. So here we are on my self-hosted version of Immich, and I'm going to go ahead and click the plus to upload. And I'm going to go ahead and select this video called Movie Test, and it's 2.3 gigabytes in size. And I go ahead and do an open, and it says error, unable to upload file. And it doesn't really tell me why, but this upload problem is related to a limit that is imposed in NginX Proxy Manager. Let's now go see how to self-host Immich in an NginX container on your home lab. We're going to be implementing Immich inside of an NginX container, and if you're unfamiliar with NginX, go over and watch my video entitled NginX Containers Step by Step. So here I do an NginX launch, images, Ubuntu 2404. I'm naming the container Immich. We're including the default profiles in the bridge profile to give the application its own address on the main LAN. I'm setting boot.autostart equals to true, which means at any time that the NginX server boots, this container starts. And then security.nesting is equal to true, and what that does is it provides the ability to nest Docker containers inside of NginX. The reason I did not use the NginX OCI containers to create the Immich application is because Immich actually has 5 Docker containers inside of it, and that would have required 5 OCI containers. So rather than that, I've nested it inside of the single container named Immich. The NginX shell command moves inside of the container, and so the first thing that we want to do is an apt update ampersand ampersand apt upgrade dash y to update all the repositories and to take any application upgrades that are available. As my dependencies, I'm going to go ahead and install nano, curl, net-tools, and open SSH server. I go ahead and type Y or yes to continue, and it installs the dependencies. Since Immich is a Docker application, we install Docker from the script on the Docker website. Now that Docker's installed, I'm going to go ahead and add a user account with an add user Scott. I'll provide Scott with the password. And then I'm going to put Scott in the sudo group with the user mod -a, capital G, sudo Scott. And we also want to put Scott in the Docker group with the user mod -a, capital G, Docker Scott. We're going to SU over to the Scott account with an SU space dash space Scott. I'll go ahead and clear the screen, and I'll do a make dir on IMMICH and CD into IMMICH, so we have all of the components of Immich stored inside of its own folder. Now we create the compose file with the nano on compose.yml, and I go ahead and paste in the contents, which will be inside of the show notes. And this compose file has 5 separate Docker applications. So I do a Control-O and Enter to write the file out, and a Control-X to exit the nano editor. The next thing we want to create is the env file, so we do a nano space.env, and I'll paste its contents in, which will also be in the show notes. The only thing you want to change here really is the database password, which should be a random long password. The only other thing that's interesting up here is the upload location, which is /library, and that's where it's going to store all of the information that you upload to IMICH, and you can point that to another location if you like. So I go ahead and do a Control-O and Enter to write the file out, and a Control-X to exit the nano editor. At this point in time, I can do a docker compose up-d to launch the application. Now that the docker compose file has completed, I should be able to do a docker space ps, and here you can see that we have 5 containers, and they're all up and running, and they're up and running for about 2 minutes now. If we do an ls command, you note that we have the data library or the data folder, we have the library folder, and we have the model cache folder for all of the data here. And the data folder, I think, contains the information for the Postgres database. The library folder contains all of the uploads and the user data that the program will store. And the model cache is to contain the information for the hardware accelerated machine learning component. At this point, if I do an ifconfig command, we're going to have quite a few virtual Ethernet devices that are each representative of the individual Docker containers that make up the application. And we're looking specifically for the ETH0 device, and we see here that it's running at an address, in my case, of 172.16.1.156. So I go up to my web browser and I go to 172.16.1.56 or 1.156, and in the Docker Compose file, I set that to expose to port 80. So I hit that and it says, "Welcome to Immich, getting started." I click the getting started. I go ahead and type in my admin email, bmsman@gmail.com. I type in an admin password and I repeat the admin password, and then I'll just type in my name as Scott and click sign up. And then they want me to log in, so I go ahead and type in my email again, and I go ahead and type in my password that I just entered, and it should log me in, provided I got my email right and I left the .com off the end. So I go ahead and click that. Then it asks for the theme. I click return, and I said yes, I want the dark theme. I click on the privacy button, and I'll go ahead and accept the defaults here, and then I'll go ahead and click done. They're saying for now the storage template capability is turned off, and that's fine with me. So I go ahead and click done, and we are now into Immich. This instance of Immich is running on my local area network, and to be more useful, we want to be able to make sure that it can be reachable from the public internet. In order to do so, we're going to go over to NginX Proxy Manager and add a proxy host. I have previously gone out to my DNS service provider, and I added the subdomain name Immich.Scotti-BYTE.net. And then the address of our Immich instance that we just created on the local area network, or the home lab, is 172.16.1.156, and it is running at port 80. I check off block common exploits and WebSockets. I head on over to the SSL tab, and I request a new certificate, and then I say I agree to the Let's Encrypt terms of service. And then it goes off to Let's Encrypt to get an SSL certificate and creates my proxy entry. And if you are noticing carefully, I got the period in the wrong place. So we want to go ahead and hit the three dots menu and edit this thing. And then we want to go back here and make sure that we remove the period between the 1 and the 6 and move it over so that it says 172.16.1.156. Now I want to head over to the SSL tab, click Force SSL to on, HTTP to support on, and HSTS on, and click Save. To test our new entry, I can simply click on Immich.Scotti-BYTE.net, and it heads on over there. If you'll remember, I put in my email address of emsman@gmail.com, and I go ahead and tab down to the password field and enter my password and click Login. Now that I'm logged into Immich, I can go ahead and do a test upload, and we'll go ahead and pick a file of 2.3 gigabytes here, and we click Open, and of course we get the failure unable to upload file, which is actually being caused by NginX Proxy Manager. I've logged out of my shell connection to my Immich server, and I'm back on the Incus server itself. And now if I do an Incus list, we notice that we have Immich up and running, and we have NPM up and running, and they're both running at their own unique LAN addresses. So I'm going to go ahead and do an Incus shell over to NPM, and then I'm going to do an SU over to the Scott account on NPM. And so my NPM server, if you've been following my videos where I show how to build NPM, or if you have your own NPM configuration already, I'm going to go ahead and CD into my NPM folder and do an LS. NPM is a pretty simple application, and normally you have just a data folder for the database and a Let's Encrypt folder for the Let's Encrypt certificates. If I cat out the docker-compose.yml file, you can see that there is only one service or one container specified here. And now if I do a docker ps, we can see the container and the container ID. What we want to do is we want to take this container ID that you see right here, and we want to go ahead and move inside of that Docker container, with the docker exec -it, the container ID, and then the bash shell. This goes ahead and moves inside of the NginX Proxy Manager Docker container. Docker containers are volatile in nature and they don't save any data between runs unless they're stored in a mapped volume, which is what the data and let's encrypt folders are. So for the purposes of this run and this run only, we're going to go ahead and do an apt update to update the repositories of the container inside of the actual container for NginX Proxy Manager. And then we're going to do an apt install on Nano. And once Nano is installed, then we're going to go ahead and do a nano on /etc/nginx/nginx.conf, which is the NginX configuration file, and it pops up inside of the Nano editor listing the contents of that file. We want to make a couple of changes to this file, so we want to go ahead and move down to the HTTP section, and if you move down far enough, you will see a section or a entry called client max body size, which is currently set to 2000 megabytes or 2 gigabytes. We're going to change that to a 0 followed by the semicolon, making sure not to eliminate the semicolon. And then I'm going to paste in 2 additional lines, one that says proxy request buffering off, and that means that it just goes ahead and sends its data directly to the program that we want to use without buffering it here first. And then I also have proxy max temp file size equal to 0, which is unlimited as well. I'll do a Control O and hit Enter to save the file out, and a Control X to exit the Nano editor. The problem with making this change live the way that we just did is that you have to restart the container for it to take effect, but if we do so, all of our changes go away. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and cat out this file, and then I'm going to scroll to the top of it in my terminal, and then I will go ahead and grab the beginning of this file here, and I'll scroll all the way down to the end. And the reason I'm not including this file is because it will have changes that are specific to your network. So I'll go ahead and do a right click and a copy, and then I'll go ahead and exit out of the container. Recall that in the npm folder, if I do an ls, I have a data and a let's encrypt folder. So I'm going to go ahead and do a make dir on config and cd inside of config. And then I'm going to do a nano on nginx.conf, the same name as the configuration file that was inside of the container. And I'll go ahead and paste my cut buffer into this file. We're going to scroll back up, and of course we have here our client max body size is 0, and our request buffering is off, and our max temp size is 0. And so I'll do a Control O and Enter to write the file out, and a Control X to exit the Nano editor. At this point, if I do an ls, there is our nginx.conf file. Now we're going to cd back to the npm directory with the cd space ... which moves up one folder in the file tree. And over here, if we do an ls, we're at the level with the docker compose file. So let's do a nano on docker-compose.yml. And when we get into the editor, let's move down to the end, and I'm going to go ahead and add a line that simply says /config nginx.conf, and that points to /etc/nginx/nginx.conf inside of the NginX folder. So it simply says that that configuration file is stored in the non-volatile location outside of the NginX Proxy Manager container. So I do a Control O and Enter to write the file out, and a Control X to exit the nano editor. Now I go ahead and exit the npm Scott account, and I exit the root account that we're shelled into, and we're back at the NginX server. And if I do an NginX list, we still have both of these here. In order to have this change take effect, we're going to have to do an NginX restart on npm, and that will simply restart the npm container. Now that the npm container is restarted with its new settings, we're going to head back up to the Immich here, and now we're going to try and do an upload. And now we'll specify our 2.3 gigabyte file that did not work before and click open. And as you can see, it is performing an upload of test.mkv, which is in excess of 2 gigabytes. Now that the upload has completed, if I come up here and refresh the screen, it should come up and show that the file is up here. And for copyright reasons, I'm not going to play this file, but you could go ahead and click on it and it would bring it up and launch it and all that kind of good stuff. So Immich also has a client for iOS that can be loaded from the Apple App Store, and it has a Google Play client as well, and it's generally used to be able to synchronize content from your Android phone or your iPhone to a private area that you control, a private server, and that's what Immich is hosting. So in summary, we self-hosted the Immich photo and video backup solution for your photos and videos within an NginX container. And we offered our Immich instance on the WAN via NginX Proxy Manager, or NPM for short. And we modified the NPM upload maximum size to be unlimited for all applications that you've hosted. And in general, you should be aware that large file uploads are generally limited by PHP settings on each of your hosted website services. But it turns out that NPM is also a bottleneck, and that may be preventing your large uploads. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.